The voice that you were hearing, who now is interested in that 9% mortgage, courtesy of DTB, is that of Erastus J.O. Mwencha. He is the former Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and he joins us this hour. Good morning, Bwana Mwencha.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you.
How are you doing?
Much better.
Much better than when?
I had a flu last week, but now I'm doing much better.
Much better. Well, you know, I'm glad that you're doing better, up and at 'em, as we say. And thank you for being here this morning. It's been a long time coming, but glad that you could join us today.
Thank you so much.
We're looking at the ramifications of Raila Odinga's AUC loss, and not just on the man, but on the geopolitical scene, or the regional political scene. And so we'll get into that conversation later. But first, we want to give you a little bit of work to do. Is that okay?
Yeah, so long as it's not so difficult work.
No, okay, well, we'll see. CT goes to a different African country every week. He comes back with a basket full of proverbs to one particular country.
Okay.
He's from a particularly interesting country this week. He'll tell you what that is. And then you'll tell us what you think about this proverb and how you would interpret it. Is that too much?
Please proceed.
Okay.
Yes. This country had a leader who was known, for those who studied history. His name was Mansa Musa.
Mansa Musa, okay.
Yes.
I'm starting to have an idea.
Yes, you're beginning to have an idea. This particular country, at some point, had a very, very interesting name, actually. It was actually called the Sudanese Republic. And one of the reasons why it was called the Sudanese Republic, it was actually merged with the country we now refer to as Senegal. The country I'm referring to is Mali.
Yes.
The Republic of Mali.
Yes.
Okay. A very interesting country, the 8th largest country by mass on the continent. Okay. Now the proverb: he who longs too much for a child will marry a pregnant woman.
Are you looking in my direction?
This is now the work.
I'm actually going beyond looking in your direction. I'm actually looking at you.
That's right.
Yeah. First of all, Mali is a very interesting place. You know, if you talk of Timbuktu,
Yes.
it was center of trade and civilization in those old days.
Thank you.
Yes.
It was, in fact, scholarly learning. It was a center for actually the religion of Islam. It was what Constantinople was in Europe for Christianity.
Yes.
As many people do not know this, but thank you. It is true.
Yes. Now, to me, that kind of implies some anxiety. That if you are too anxious, you know, there is a saying that if there's one particular experiment that was done, some little children were given mesmero, and they were told, don't touch it until after a certain time. But some could not resist. They went ahead and opened and chewed it up.
Yeah.
A study revealed that later on, those who managed to resist that temptation actually performed much better in life because they had patience. So if you lose patience in terms of waiting, you tend to make mistakes. I don't know whether you are laughing, and I was thinking that your gray hair perhaps comes with a lot of wisdom. Can you help me?
My gray hair simply comes with age. Yes. Wisdom is an added value that doesn't necessarily follow gray hair, but
maybe in this particular case, yes.
No, but you've dissected the proverb beautifully.
Very beautifully.
Thank you. Yes.
I love it.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, again, thank you for being here, Bwana Mwencha, and even as we get into this conversation. So the 15th of February came, it went, it had the results, it bore the results that some were expecting, others were not. And you, having sat in the deputy position of this particular seat, understand the workings of the AUC very well. But then here we are 2 weeks later, maybe 1 week later, and I have to ask the question, should we still be dealing with the hangover of the AUC loss at this point, or should we not be able to drink some water and move on?
I think it's a bit of both. We should dust ourselves and move on. But the reason I say a bit of both, we should also take lessons from what has happened, so that in the future we don't perhaps fall into the same pitfall as we did.
What are the pitfalls?
There are many. And if you allow me then to step back, I would say the campaign was fantastic.
Okay.
Support was more than adequate. But I think along the way we faltered and we didn't listen to the ground carefully to see what had shifted as we continued on that journey towards Addis Ababa. And I would see it from a number of angles. First of all, you have to look at it, the candidate, the country, and the geopolitics of the region. I would say, without a doubt, knowing the three candidates that were on the ballot, and I know both three of them very well. I've worked with them in my previous incarnation. And as a matter of fact, one of them was working with me when I was at COMESA as Secretary General. I would say Kenyan candidate was the best. And so the continent has perhaps missed an opportunity of having the best of the services in terms of leadership, vision, transformation, and the rest. But then when it comes to geopolitics, the way I see it, and this is where I said we didn't listen to the ground, the campaign out what I would call exogenous factors, which were not in any way the making of the candidate, came into play. Some of this could be what was happening in the region, and some of the decisions that we had made as a country stood in the way. And then I think the last part, which I would also look at the campaign itself, it's good to do a marathon, but you must have energy for finishing kick.
Indeed.
I used to run cross country when I was young. And you could see people losing once they see the tape ahead of them, that people come and overtake them. I saw that happening. And I'm sure many of you saw that in the first round. We were leading, and then thereafter we lost. In other words, we didn't have a strategy on how to finish strong.
Right. Does it have any bearing? And we've had the pundits and the analysts over the last 2 weeks talk about how then Kenya's diplomacy then has taken a major hit, and that Kenya's position with the Rex, Kenya's position with regional bodies then has taken a hit diplomatically in terms of practice and form.
I wouldn't say that what is happening at the moment in terms of the diplomatic, what we might say, scenario that is now obtaining, all comes from Addis Ababa. But it played a role in Addis Ababa because maybe the stand we are taken on some of the issues, whether it was Gaza, played a role in some of the countries. Maybe the position we were taken in terms of the crisis in DRC played a role. And maybe the position we are taken in the case of Sudan also could have played a role in the geopolitics. But you see, one would have overcome that because normally when you are well known as a candidate, the country might weigh on your candidature, but also your personality can overcome that. And this is where I thought we could have been able to overcome this.
But there's some who argue that our local politics also had a role to play. The fact that President William Ruto came out boldly for Raila Odinga. In certain instances, there are certain analysis that comes out to say perhaps the role of President William Ruto strongly, even in just Addis, etc., and other conventions, also might have come out strongly in as far as our local politics playing on and Raila Odinga's candidature was concerned. Is that something that you speak to?
There is an element, one would say, that the campaign was heightened by the huge support that the candidate received from the head of state. Nothing unusual about that.
Yeah.
But of course, you could say, that heightened support raised one or two queries in some quarters. People saying, "Hi, is the candidate himself prepared, or is he, being retired of the position?" I would call it. But that's not true, because what I noticed of him, right from the beginning, I'm privy to the fact that he was very keen to go. I had some conversation with him even before the candidature was announced. So it was self-made, not that it was imposed on him to go. Whether he received the support thereafter is now word under the bridge.
Okay. The question that has been lingering in my mind, this particular position, is it the quest for a Pan-African civil servant, or is it a quest for a political individual who can fit into a public service role?
A very good question. And in the transformation of the Organization of African Unity,
yes,
to the African Union Commission, and I was privy to some of the conversation that took place, because as Secretary General of COMESA and regional economic communities are seen as part and parcel of the African Union project. And so I used to attend many of the programs and meetings that led to the transformation from OAU to AUC. And if you follow that time, which was led largely by leaders like Obasanjo, Mbeki, to some extent Gaddafi, and people like the former president of Senegal, Wade, they had a vision of having a very strong commission. And that's why the first chair of the commission was President Konare. So that was intentional, very much intentional, to have a commission that has the capacity to be able to solve some of the challenges the continent has, particularly in the area of peace and security, coordinate integration, and bring about harmony in the continent. But I would say, and my team, we were the first team to succeed after the Konare administration. You could see that there was an easiness to have a former head of state as the chair of the commission.
Why?
Because perhaps he could bypass certain what I could call bureaucracies and talk directly to heads of state and government, be able to move things, and in foreign affairs. I never worked in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I've been international civil servant through and through. I think they always would prefer that you go through them. If you are going to talk to a head of state, they wouldn't like to find a call coming from State House to say, "Hey, we've received this information from Addis," and so they felt uneasy. And it was also difficult for President Konare to be able to call a minister, and say, "Look, I want to do this and that. Please, can you talk to a head of state?" When he had their numbers directly, he could work with them. And so that, I think, you could see that uneasiness. And I could also perhaps decipher that was one of the reasons why Konare didn't want to seek even a re-election. I have no proof of that.
Okay.
But I could tell reluctance and frustration in him. Our administration, we kind of tried to do that and work with the bureaucracy. And the only thing then you fall into, things don't move as fast as you would. In fact, you would see that AU has been sliding.
It has been on a very distinct downward trajectory.
Regrettably.
So when you look at then now that downward trajectory that the AU has been taking, I mean, I've said that for very long, that there's certain factors that then affect, the positioning of the AU. For example, where a lot of its funding comes from. The fact that it's made up of, very, very many nations have joined the union who, number one, have not been able to sort out things in their backyard. Number two, when we talk about regional coordination, also have issues here and there. That you have the RECs who form the regional bodies, but they're not able to come together in source of agreement. Does that not affect the AU completely? And then are we looking at somebody then who'd be able to come and bring about the unity of which is in the name in the first place? Was that the agenda, to say bring somebody who would then be able to come and unite the EU, try and get as many nations to bring in their contributions, because we know where a lot of the funding for the AU comes from? Are we not looking at a body, for example, which already is weakened in its very composure because of the fact that, number one, the funding comes externally, number two, the bodies that make up the nations that make up the AU are not even united?
Thank you for those remarks. You have asked quite a number of questions in your profound statement. One of them is the funding. Yes, true. AU is the strength of AU is reflected in the strength of the member states themselves. If you look at the budget of Kenya, how much foreign aid do we get in the budget? You saw the other day when USAID pulled out or was dismembered. A number of countries were shocked to find that they were supporting a large portion of their sectors of health and the rest. So that is also a reflection of the AU. But I must say that a lot of effort has been made to close that. Even before we left, I remember in 2015, I was still at the AU. The member states took a decision, and which was being implemented now, that only programs could be financed partially by members, by international community. A large portion of it must be contributed to member states. For instance, when it comes to payment of salaries and all these running expenses, it is 100% by member states. But when it comes to programs, by their nature, some programs may require some of foreign component, they are financed externally. But I would say that you still find, if you look at the development expenditure, because recurrent expenditure is only about 35% of the budget, but that 65%, a large portion of it is external. That weakens you, because as they say, who pays the piper calls the tune. Yeah, which is true in a way. But you also raised another question, the composition of member states.
Yes.
Unlike, for instance, the European Union, where member states are prepared, made ready to join the bus, the African Union, everybody was in the bus right from 1963.
Yes.
So you could not offload anybody to say, go and be ready to come and get into the bus. So since they are all in the bus, you have to keep on hoping that they have enough fare to continue the journey. And of course, some of them to run out, but you can't offload them. So you carry them, and so it's dead weight in a way that they are not contributing to the running of the bus, but they are there. And of course, what you say is true, that a number of countries, and this is one thing I like to quote one leader who says, if you look at the Berlin Conference, which bequeathed us with these nation states, some of them are really suboptimal. Even operating as a country, you go there, you find a country that is struggling to even survive.
Yes.
So that is a reflection, I say.
How do you demand of them to pay an AU
Exactly.
contribution?
When they have not paid their soldiers or their teachers and the rest. And a number of countries are in that state.
But the question that I want to ask is, let's assume a mythical position where the African countries were able to hold their own in terms of looking after their own citizenry. Would we be in a position to actually run our affairs from our own coffers?
In Africa?
Yep.
I want to believe that if you look at particularly the Kibaki administration from 2002 to 2007, the country moved to almost 95% of financing its budget.
Yes.
That, of course, happened. And, of course, even that time, a number of programs were initiated, infrastructure and the rest. So, and I know a number of countries like Botswana, that have been running actually a surplus budget. So the short answer to your question, yes, you can. And a number of countries have done it in the continent. But I must say, by and large, which is true, is that most countries are donor dependent.
You see, they are made to be donor dependent because with the donor assistance comes also the stagnation of your own ability because of dependency.
Correct.
Yes. So my question was actually two-pronged in the way I asked it. If indeed I look at associations that are similar to the AU, let's talk EU, okay? There's a way in which, even as they contribute, member states that perhaps may not have the same resources as the others still contribute and still benefit as members of that particular institution. But there's an ethos that lends itself to how that particular working is. But ours, given just the turmoils that we see in member states from time to time, the country that I've taken the proverb from, they have had issues, they have pending issues as we speak, they have neighbors who have similar issues. Now, are we saying that the constant state of instability that many African countries find themselves in is a huge contributor to this discussion about contribution?
Yeah, what you say is fundamental, and I want to agree with you to a very large extent, but add this caveat. If you look at the budget of the African Union, when I was there, we were running a budget of about $1 billion per year. But peace and security, of course, consumed much more. Peace and security, sometimes we needed about $2 billion or more, depending on, for instance, if we had AMSOM and such like. There was a time we had the African force in Mali and all that. Peace tends to consume quite a bit. Now, if you talk of 1 billion of a continent that has a GDP of 3.5 trillion, it's a very small portion.
Yep,
it is.
We even had come up with the formula when before I left that just take 0.2% of your tax, your import, tax, and ring fence it for the African Union. In fact, it came up to a very big figure, running into billions. And then, but of course, then we said, you don't have to send that to the African Union. It's a very small figure, but collectively for the continent, it's a very big amount. You can retain some of the money that you need from there for running regional type of projects, because each country has regional type of projects. For instance, if you have a road linking between Kenya and Uganda, that's a regional project.
Sure.
Can be financed from that. But then send it to Addis Ababa, that portion which is required. And the member states, it's the council of ministers that meet, approve the budget of the African Union. That which you have approved, transfer enough for that. And they continue to use that collection to support the continent. And you can do it. It's hard to tell you. It's lack of political will.
Political will.
Yeah, I mean, let's not beat about the bush.
Indeed. African Union takes center stage of a lot of the conversations that are happening currently around the world. We see the wave of nationalism that is happening across Europe. We see the same thing that essentially gave Donald Trump another stab at the presidency. And then the question is, why not Africa taking up that same position whereby nations can believe in themselves and essentially form a continental bloc that could compete with the world? What stops us, Mwencha? And we came off the break when you talked about political will. For me, that's one of them. But
our weakness has been, I would say, comprises a number of facets. One of them is the fact that we never really, we gained a flag independence, but not economic independence. I can see you smiling and just wondering what that means.
I am definitely smiling. Yes.
Kwame Nkrumah said, since you talk of the heritages from the past, said that until we gain economic independence, we'll continue to be hooked to the colonial government. It's ironic that 65 years later on, we are still lamenting on that. But we have seen the wave of what's happening in West Africa and the rest, where countries are trying to get out of the yoke that was developed with the particularly francophone countries. Because many of them, I mean, you look at, they still run on the currency that they inherited from them.
Right.
The mineral resources are committed to those countries. And governance structures and even education is still part of the Western culture. We have not reclaimed our culture from colonial heritage. You and I are still Anglo-Saxon as they come. You may not believe it. That's why we're speaking in English today. We should be speaking in Swahili here today, but we're not. But that is not enough. A number of countries, the question then asks, why are, for instance, if you look at countries in Asia, have developed much faster than Africa? The second one then is the leadership that we have inherited over the years. That's another facet. If you look at some of the regions, call it Southern Africa and Northern Africa, we have leaders, particularly those freedom party movements, who came into office believing that they were entitled and it has been very difficult to change some of those. And so you have continued to have, in short, poor leadership in the continent.
All right.
The third one, of course, the international global economic architecture has not been very favorable to Africa. Those who set the rules, whether it was the institutions that they created after the Second World War, were created in such a manner that Africa would just be a price taker. And look at whether it is trade, it is not south flows. In terms of manufactured goods, we provide raw materials. So we haven't come, and that's one of the reasons why integration was initiated, so that Africa working together. In fact, Nkrumah said, if we don't have political independence, it will also be difficult to achieve economic independence. And he advocated that we start with a United States of Africa.
Okay.
But that project was defeated by, among others, Nyerere, who felt that let's start with regional economic communities. Regional economic communities have made progress, but not fast enough. And to the irony of things, they are now balkanizing the continent along regional economic communities. So there are many.
All right.
I can see you want to ask more.
Because
so let's go into that.
I am just particularly curious as far as unity is concerned and the states having their own self-interest. And this came out to play out even during the elections because we have the African Union, but I think one of my colleagues also spoke on the interest of each state. And looking at how the voting pattern turned out, I'm just coming back there because you vote. Because what is the role of the chairperson? Administration promoting its objective of the AU, dealing with key stakeholders, that is member states, development partners, etc. Now, if they were to vote, if they voted based on their interests, does that have anything whatsoever for Kenya to learn in terms of alignment? I'm just curious to understand in terms of unity vis-a-vis self-interests of the states within the AU.
There is a way that you can still play the two.
Yes.
Without sacrificing the greater good for the continent.
Okay.
In other words, self-interest doesn't have to die for any country to be able to still play a role as a common good. Let me give you an example, even the way we promote our candidatures within the continent.
Okay.
Diplomacy does not allow me to be naming countries, but for today I'll do it.
We appreciate it.
Look at, for instance, the way Rwanda goes about promoting its candidates for international positions. Today, as we speak, Rwanda is heading Francophonie. Rwanda is at the helm of the continent as Executive Secretary of Economic Commission for Africa. But also Rwanda is occupying the position, as we speak, of Deputy Chairperson of the African Commission. How does this happen? As a country, you must, I see us saying we want to promote jobs in the diaspora and the rest. I guess we are only looking for technical menial jobs. But as a country, we are very strategic. You can map up all international organizations and say, how do we promote Kenyan interest in those positions?
Yeah.
Okay.
And prepare people for that position. And once you prepare them, and so long as you want to pick the best, you'll always get them. And that's what Rwanda does, for instance. Goes, and you have to have a long shot at that. I'll tell you, for instance, I don't know, this candidature that we just talked about, I saw Kenya campaign like no another time. I can tell you for a fact, when I was campaigning to be deputy chairperson of the African Union, I received very little support from the government.
Okay.
Very little. Not a penny. The only thing I remember that was given to me, there was a reception organized in Addis Ababa that brought together the ambassadors in the diplomatic community, where I was asked to come and address. Plus, of course, the fact that my candidature was submitted by the government. But that is the best that was done. So there is, as a country, we have not developed a good strategy of how to make sure that we position ourselves to occupy certain positions, and you go for it as a long-term strategy. And as a long-term strategy, you have to expose people, prepare them, so that when that time comes, you have the best lined up for that position. So self-interest doesn't mean you have to give candidates because they come from your village or for some other reason. So that's part of, we don't have a very good strategy for that matter.
There's always the talk when we refer to our continent. There's always talk about external influences.
Yes, yes, true.
And whenever we talk of external influences, one talks about Europe, one talks about America, one talks about China, one talks about Russia. My question is, are these the only influence we have? Because if I look at the conversations even within the EU and whatever took place, and I look at some of the difficulties we've had in the Horn of Africa, and some of the difficulties we're now having in Sudan, other players and the mention of other names keep coming in. Now, for someone to have influence, you must have given them some leeway to have that influence.
Yes.
What is our weakest spot? What is it that makes us succumb to these influences in a way that actually destabilizes the continent even as we see it?
First, you talked about external factor, and which is a reality. If you think of the African Union position, it attracts a lot of international interest.
Yes.
And some of it is because Africa is now become a center of attraction internationally because of its wealth, and but the fact that also they are very keen to join the journey of integration for their own interest, of course.
Yes.
They are not all the time that they join it for the purpose of goodwill for you, but their own goodwill. And because of that, they would have influence. I would not be surprised when you hear of Francophonie, where it is also other countries putting in a word to say this is a candidate that we think would be okay. But I would say that is diminishing quite a bit. A number of leaders, tend to have a mind of their own. A number of leaders, I said, and that's true. But a few of them perhaps might succumb to that kind of influence.
Right.
But I think what you mentioned, particularly as internal weaknesses, as a continent, and this is where we make mistakes. For instance, if you look at the African Union, and I've seen that happen with some of the regional economic communities, there is this quest that I must have my person occupy that position. And that person, you are not doing it because you need the good of that institution. It's because you need to occupy that position. It's my turn. And one of the things I was disappointed with the African Union, particularly in the last election, is this question of rotation. That, East Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, you are balkanizing the continent. Get the best out of the continent. The moment you do that, I've seen regional economic communities where they rotate secretarial positions or chairmanship, you get weak candidates occupying those positions because you are not getting the best. So yes, you are right. I mean, there's that conflict, tension between self-interest, parochial interests that doesn't really work for the common good.
Why is it important to look at the place a country plays in its regional as well as global politics, aside from its internal politics? Why is that important?
Countries tend to project their own national strength,
Okay.
forgetting that if you put 3 sticks together, they are stronger than 1 stick. I mean, I've seen in the continent, everybody knows that, for instance, if Africa now start to trade within itself, have a common external tariff, protect itself, and to borrow its own words, Africa first, that you do what US is doing, this nationalism that we see growing, you become much stronger, you negotiate together. But we are so easy to penetrate and infiltrate, and we succumb to those small tokens they give us in the form of aid or threats they may issue, and then we remain weak and disunited. So that is really an inherent weakness. But we need a new wave, and I see that wave coming.
Okay.
I'm not a pessimist that I should give up. When I see integration in the 80s and integration in the 90s, integration now, there came a time, particularly at the end of the Cold War, that integration was losing its momentum. But I can see that momentum picking up. New leaders who are saying, now let's not continue to limp on. Let's stand for our own rights.
And progressively then, having served in your position as well, how do you think we are moving as a country to achieve our agenda, of course, 2063, in terms of, like you've said, the leadership that is taking over, etc.? What would be, in your assessment, your analysis of our movement as a continent towards Agenda 2063?
I must say, and be very honest here,
yes,
that in spite of a few missteps that as a country makes from time to time, and Kenya has done that, Kenya has been a very good in terms of adhering to the continental and regional integration program. Kenya participates very effectively in regional integration, whether you look at trade. Kenya trades quite a bit with the region, and in fact is overtaken some of the markets that Kenya was exporting to. If you look at our infrastructure, Kenya is a gateway to a number of countries. Kenya has also been very much participating, whether it is in air transport, regional infrastructure, and the rest. Kenya has been very effective in that. But of course, to me, some of the areas that we need to learn is how to play the soft aspect of it. The soft, there is
soft power.
Soft power. So that in a region, we don't go there as, my sisters don't take offense, as big brother, but we go as equals and the partners.
Right.
I sometimes have a feeling some of the countries see us as coming as big brother. We have never learned that lesson of humility, brotherhood, and that. I used to tell some of the delegations when they come to Addis Ababa, they would come and start saying, "What can we do here?" I said, "Don't approach it that way. How can we be of use to you?" That is a mindset, and by the way, is something. If you go to Tanzania, since you talk of countries, they will always tell somebody who has come from Kenya, the way even your Swahili is, "Nataka chai," but naomba chai. That humility is not with us.
Okay.
The poverty of spirit, somebody once called it, extends to a people believing in themselves and actually believing that they can actually do something. And oftentimes the problem is we take the cue from the leadership. And much as we may say otherwise, it's what we do. If the leadership is leaning in one direction, then people tend to follow. We may speak the language we're speaking, but do we learn from the people whose language we speak? Because this is the English language. The English practiced colonization among their own long before they actually left their shores to come here. The Welsh, the Scots, the Irish. These people fine-tuned imperialism. By the time they were coming to deal with us, they had understood this thing to a T. And to their credit, they even understood when to leave that particular stage and create something else that would still keep them in power while giving the impression that we are one big happy Commonwealth family. They have understood how to take care of their interests. We speak the language, but we haven't learned how to take care of the interests the way the people who learned us this language have.
Quite right. In fact, if you got the spirit of my earlier intercourse, discussion, I was kind of saying, when we took over as independent states, we just walked into the shoes of the colonial masters. And so the face changed, the skin changed. The colonial masters who were of a different color left, but we inherited those institutions and cherished them and continue to use them.
And you see,
you got some of the countries we still want to perfect things and do things the way they were doing. So you are absolutely right. Now that's why I said, unless we come to deconstruct the colonial heritage that we inherently were born into and are assimilated into, we still remain slaves of our old self.
You know the enslavement that you speak of?
Yes.
See, I was segueing into just one little point. The fact that you had a colonizer and imperialist who understood the need to change, it means this is somebody who is willing to change even more and engage with you on a level that you yourself haven't envisioned engaging them in. Because if we say a country like Botswana has a surplus, they are the same colonizers.
Used to, not now.
Yes, now they have their issues, but they've had it. It means they were able to manage their affairs. You can talk about the population, you can talk about anything, but they did it.
That's the principle.
Yeah. Correct.
Yes. We look at South Africa, when they decide that they are going to be part of the BRICS, that's an independent way of looking at things. They're saying, look, we understand, but there are things we're not going to do exactly the way you want. I'm simply saying that even somebody who is a power in and of themselves, when they realize that you have your house in order, they change the way they behave towards
Absolutely.
you.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
In other words, what you are saying,
Yes.
it is we to blame.
Yeah, that is precisely it.
Yes. Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, and that's why I said we cannot keep on lamenting and regretting that it's the colonial heritage that is keeping us where we are.
No.
But we have not had the will, because the pathway for us, for our independence, is clear.
Yeah.
But we have not chosen that. In other words, I sit one of the earlier vice president, Murumbi, said the road not taken. We didn't take the highway. We chose to borrow the main street, which was to lead us back to the metropolitan.
Yeah.
I'm curious to understand the interpretation of some remarks, I think, by PLO Lumumba back then, that you cannot kill a mosquito with a hammer.
Exactly.
I do not know what do you make of that comment? You cannot kill a mosquito with a hammer in as far as Africa is shaping up.
I have to know the context under which he's talking.
Yeah.
But killing a hammer,
a mosquito,
of course, means bringing overwhelming energy to a very small matter. And I don't know what he sees as small in the continent.
Okay.
But I would not spare an effort for Africa to unite and to move to become one.
Indeed.
In fact, if you look at the people like, and this is known, some people like Gaddafi was zealous to make sure that the continent unites.
Absolutely.
In fact, he poured his energy and resources for the continent to unite.
Yeah.
But it was not popular in the West.
No.
It was not popular in the West. So that is a sacrifice that we must be ready to pay for us, the continent, to achieve. In fact, one of the things that is missing in our quest for integration today is that we don't have that spirit where, as you were growing up, you knew Mwafrika apate uhuru. That uhuru united, the Kralion call, we lack it in the continent.
And it needs to come back.
That we need that Kralion call for the continent.
That's a good conversation to start on in terms of what should actually come in the future to bring back those times of yesteryear when that voice was actually very loud and came out to actually do something.
Yes.
I want to thank you very much. Erastus J.O. Mwencha has been our guest this hour as we look at then what happens next after this and what should we be looking at for the future in terms of the African Union.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.